What happens when the girl everyone dismissed turns out to be the blueprint for reform. On a clear spring morning, Sierra Langston boarded Flight 218 with nothing but a carry-on and a quiet smile. No security detail, no entourage, just a seat in first class, the same seat she'd flown in with her mother for years. But when the crew looked at her skin before her boarding pass, everything unraveled. She was humiliated, removed, and nearly forgotten. But Sierra carried something they didn't expect. Not revenge, not rage, but something far more powerful: infrastructure. What did she say that turned 5 major airports against a global airline chain? What was the hidden system her mother left behind that would expose bias at 30,000 feet? And how does a soft-spoken young woman become the reason aviation ethics would never be the same? This isn't just a story of injustice. It's about how quiet power rewrites the rules. If you've ever been judged before being heard, drop a comment, like, share, and subscribe. Now let's begin the story of the girl who never raised her voice, but made the whole world listen. The moment Sierra Langston stepped into the first-class cabin, she felt it. Not the cool hush of air conditioning or the soft lighting meant to mimic calm. No, this was colder. This was a silence that watched. She tucked her hoodie closer around her frame and paused in front of Seat 2A, checking the number again, just to be sure. She had read it right. Boarding pass confirmed. The gate attendant had even smiled as she scanned it. But here, surrounded by polished leather and polished people, it suddenly felt fictional, like she had stepped onto the wrong stage mid-scene. Sierra shifted her weight, placed her worn backpack down carefully, and began to unzip her coat when a voice landed crisp, clipped, and unmistakably trained. "Excuse me, Miss." She turned. A woman in a Navy uniform stood by the aisle, arms crossed tight, smile stretched thin. "This section isn't for general boarding." Sierra blinked. "I'm sorry," I said. "This cabin is reserved for confirmed first-class passengers only. Boarding Group 4 isn't assigned up here." Her heart thudded not fast, but firm. "I have seat 2A," she said, voice steady, pulling the printed pass from her coat pocket. The flight attendant, Becca Monroe, according to the small pin on her blazer, took the pass like it might smudge her. A single glance, barely a flick. Then came the frown. "This looks printed." "Because it is," Sierra replied gently. "I checked in online, like it said." Becca's eyes swept her again. Hoodie, faded jeans, beat-up sneakers, brown skin, teenager, alone. And then came the one question Sierra had heard more than once, always from people who meant well or didn't. "Where are your parents?" The way it was asked made the temperature drop, like concern, but not like suspicion dressed in protocol. "I'm traveling solo," Sierra said, sliding her pass back. "I'm 16. It's not my first time flying." Becca's jaw tightened. One moment, she turned and walked briskly toward the front of the cabin. Sierra could feel the eyes on her, a man adjusting his cufflinks beside 1C, an older couple 2 rows behind, whispering. She sat anyway, calmly, deliberately. Her fingers trembled only once as she adjusted the seatbelt. Then she heard it not loud, but clear over the quiet hum of boarding. "Can I get airport security to the front, please?" "We have an unaccompanied minor in first class with an unverified boarding pass." It hit like static in the air. A sudden silence followed by murmurs. Someone dropped their phone. Someone else cleared their throat. No one said a word. Sierra stayed seated, jaw set, eyes ahead. "I will not shrink. I will not fold. Not for a seat I earned." Her mother used to say that. "If they challenge your space, hold it harder." 2 security officers boarded within a minute. One looked younger than Sierra had expected. The other older, heavier, moving like a man who had seen this scene too many times. Becca met them with a too smooth smile and outstretched hand. "She's not on our manifest." And the pass looks fake. The older officer squinted at it. This says Seat 2A. She must have moved up during boarding, Becca added. There's no other explanation. That was it. Sierra stood, slowly, calmly, but her voice just a notch above a whisper shook. I didn't move anywhere, she said. I scanned my pass at the gate. I followed every rule. The only thing I did was sit in a seat some people think I don't deserve. The younger officer hesitated, but Becca's voice cut in. Just move her while we verify. It'll be easier for everyone. Sierra nodded once, not in agreement. In understanding. This wasn't about policy. This wasn't about safety. This was about assumptions, appearances, control. I'll go, she said, reaching down to pick up her backpack. But you're making a mistake. The walk to row 34 felt longer than any hallway she'd ever known. Each step echoed, not because of the noise, because of what wasn't said. No one spoke up. Not the couple whispering earlier. Not the businessman with his Bluetooth headset. No one offered so much as a look of solidarity. She arrived at 34D, middle seat, window already closed, one armrest sticky, the man beside her already snoring. The boy on the other side smelled vaguely of sugar and anxiety drinks. Sierra sat, pulled her backpack into her lap, swallowed once. Then she reached inside a hidden panel stitched into the lining of her bag and pulled out a sleek, matte black device. Not quite a phone, not quite a tablet, her mother's design. It hummed faintly at her touch. Fingerprint verified. Tier 4 access unlocked. Military encryption, civilian authority, Langston protocol, ethics flag access portal. It had been dormant for years, but not gone. Her mother had helped design it before the accident, a system embedded into the ethics framework of 12 major U.S. airports meant to detect, audit, and document violations in passenger treatment, especially of minors, disabled passengers, and ethnic minorities. Most didn't know it still existed, but Sierra did. Her mother, Elora Langston, hadn't just died. She had been buried by systems that called her inconvenient, and today the daughter they ignored had just watched history repeat. She typed one sentence, Tier 4 violation, passenger removed without cause, minor, flight Virejet 218, location JFK San Diego, operator Monroe. B. Then she hesitated. One more line. This is Sierra Langston, daughter of Elora. Verification attached. A pause, and then she pressed send. No alarm, no sound, but a cascade of systems connected by quiet code, written by a woman they all forgot, began to listen. Row 34 wasn't a punishment. Not exactly, but it felt like one. Sierra had sat in this kind of seat before. It was the kind built without generosity, cramped, rigid, with tray tables that clicked too loud and armrests that never quite belonged to anyone. The kind of row that reminded you this is what you get. She sat perfectly still, hands folded in her lap like folded paper. The black device, the one her mother had built and left behind, now rested silently inside her backpack, sealed and locked. No one around her knew what she had just triggered. No one knew that 5 minutes ago. She had sent a Tier 4 compliance report directly into the heart of the FAA ethics network. No one knew she had used her mother's master key, but the system did. And systems don't forget. The boy in the window seat beside her let out a loud sigh, tapping away at some game on his tablet. He hadn't even noticed her arrive. Good. She wasn't here to make noise. She was here to record everything. Outside the cabin, the final passengers were still boarding. Overhead, bins slammed shut with little thuds. The murmur of flight attendants checking final bags filled the air like static. In the distance, she heard Becca Monroe's voice, still firm, still smiling, still in control. Sierra didn't turn around. She knew better than to give Power her attention. Why now, she asked herself. Why did it have to happen now, on this flight, in this exact way? Was it the way Becca looked at her? Was it the assumption, the tone, The ease with which her authority had erased Sierra's presence, or was it the silence that followed? How no one asked if she was okay. How every gaze shifted away, politely, conveniently. She looked down at the boarding pass still folded in her hoodie pocket, wrinkled now, a little torn at the edge, but still real, still hers. You didn't move anywhere. She had told them, and it was true. She hadn't moved out of place. The world had simply tried to move her out of view. Somewhere above them, the seatbelt light chimed. She felt the shift in cabin pressure, the gentle tug of ascent, the thrum of turbines gaining speed. They were airborne now, and so was her report. It started 23 seconds after takeoff. At the Denver Aviation Ethics Hub, a light flickered red. The server flagged an inbound compliance ping from Tier 4 Access. Identifier Langston Protocol Sierra L. Severity moderate. Trigger type passenger. Bias. Minor displacement. A system engineer paused, then pulled up the flagged flight number Virejet 218. A moment later, the Philadelphia monitoring desk received the same ping, then Toronto, then Seattle. The Langston protocol had not been activated in nearly 4 years, but when it was, it whispered to every node in the network. It threaded quietly through ethics dashboards and compliance AI. It connected towers and data centers, and it asked one question: are you paying attention now? Back in row 34, Sierra stared ahead, but her thoughts wandered. To her mother, to the woman who never yelled in meetings, who never stormed out of boardrooms, but who always brought receipts. She remembered her mother's favorite saying, "True power isn't about volume. It's about architecture." 3 years ago, Dr. Elora Langston died on a routine flight to Chicago. The story made news for a day. Medical emergency. No one blamed the airline, but Sierra knew better. She had read the after-action reports. Her mother's medical alert had been ignored, her request for water dismissed. A flight attendant had written in their report, "Passenger appeared anxious, not urgent." She collapsed quietly near the restroom. They said it was too late by the time they checked. Sierra was 13, and the grief hadn't been loud. It had been code, lines of it, buried deep in the files her uncle helped decrypt. Her uncle, Omar Langston, wasn't a man of speeches either. He worked in ethics modeling, consulted for independent review panels, stayed quiet in meetings, but always asked the one question no one wanted: and what happens when you assume that night, months after the funeral? He sat beside Sierra in the living room and handed her a device. It looked like a phone, but heavier, matte black, fingerprint locked. It belonged to her mother. She called it the Langston key. He said softly, "She didn't build it for herself. She built it for moments like this." Sierra had opened it with shaking fingers. Inside access to a civilian interface embedded in the FAA's oversight layer, not destructive, not invasive, but watchful. It was designed to flag systems that failed silently, cabins that ejected without cause, employees who crossed lines dressed as policy. Sierra closed her eyes now. The engine hum surrounded her like white noise. A strange peace settled over her chest. I didn't trigger this out of spite. I triggered it because I was supposed to. In the cockpit, Captain Julian Reyes received a blinking message on the flight console. "Priority advisory only. Subject Flight 218 under temporary Tier 4 FAA audit. Gate landing pending. Maintain current altitude until rerouted." He blinked. That was unusual. This wasn't weather. It wasn't traffic. It was a protocol ethics hold. He tapped into the pilot communication relay. His co-pilot raised an eyebrow. "Is that legit?" Captain Reyes nodded slowly. "It's real." They looked at each other. Neither said what they were both thinking. In seat 34D, Sierra scrolled slowly through the secure interface. No gloating, no joy. Just a soft glow from her screen and one simple status update. Tier 4 ethics report acknowledged. FAA observation in progress. At that moment, Becca Monroe, still pacing near the galley, received a silent notification on her crew device. Crew member flagged under Langston Audit Protocol. Preliminary status under review. She frowned. The name Langston tickled something in her memory, something from an old HR briefing, but she brushed it off. Probably nothing. It wouldn't stay nothing. In fact, nothing was about to become everything. At exactly 8:47 a.m., cruising at 33,000 feet over central Arizona, the real turbulence began. It wasn't in the air. The skies were smooth, blue like brushed glass, no clouds, no wind, no storms, but the network had already started to buckle. Inside the FAA Western Operations Control Room in Denver, a technician named Devin Park leaned back in his chair and frowned. He'd seen system alerts before. Gate misfires, route conflicts, occasionally ethics pings, but this one had a name he hadn't seen in 4 years. Langston Protocol, Tier 4 Activation Source Passenger Terminal Ethics Flag Youth, Verified ID Subject Flight Virejet, 218 Incident, Minor Removal, Without Cause Flagged, by Sierra Langston. His stomach dipped. He tapped the internal message board to confirm it wasn't spoofed. It wasn't. Denver wasn't the only one seeing red. By the time he clicked again, 4 more hubs had received the alert: Philadelphia, Seattle, Toronto, Kansas City. This isn't a local flag, Devin thought. This is a full-tier ripple, cascading protocols. He stood from his chair, walked briskly to the supervisor's desk, and leaned down. You need to see this. The supervisor, a woman named Lena Fawcett, glanced at the screen, then straightened sharply. Her voice dropped. Get me Director Whitaker. Back on board Flight 218, the seatbelt light remained on. Captain Julian Reyes reviewed the 3rd advisory flag in 10 minutes. Same system, same phrasing, but this time, an override line appeared. Do not initiate gate approach without ethics confirmation. Compliance observation in effect. Source Langston Tier Access. He tapped his headset. Flight control. This is 218. We've received an unusual ethics overlay. Confirm routing for Boston Logan. Please. The reply came in static at first, then clipped. Stand by. 218. Routing paused pending FAA signal resolution. Please maintain current altitude. He frowned. That wasn't normal. They never paused landings this early. Beside him, his first officer, Grant, looked over. Are we grounded? Reyes didn't answer. Not because he didn't know, but because he was afraid he did. In row 34D, Sierra kept her eyes on the screen. Her report had expanded. The system had processed the footage. A side-facing cabin camera had recorded the interaction enough to support her version. It didn't catch Becca's exact words, but it showed her body language, the dismissive tone, the call for security within 22 seconds of checking the boarding pass, the refusal to verify ID, all of it cataloged, time-stamped, digitally traceable. The Langston Protocol was designed to notice not just what was said, but what was ignored. Somewhere in Washington, D.C., a secure line buzzed to life. Danica Whitaker, senior FAA ethics officer, hadn't had coffee yet, but she dropped the mug the moment her screen lit up. Subject Langston Protocol Tier 4, Flag Verified Flag ID, SL01572 Passenger. Sierra Langston, Action Minor Removal. Non-compliant procedure. Logged. Her breath caught. She remembered that name. Everyone in her division did. The Langston Protocol had been shelved politically, not technically. Too aggressive, they'd said. Too risky. Too inconvenient. But now it had woken, and it had remembered who built it. Danica clicked Access Chain. Sierra's name blinked back at her. Under Legacy Ethics User. Verified minor with Federal Compliance Key. She muttered under her breath. Elora's daughter. Inside the cabin. The mood had shifted. Passengers in first class were noticing, first, the delay, then the odd expressions on the crew's faces, then the absence of Becca Monroe. who had quietly retreated to the galley after receiving a second crew alert, crew member status ethics review pending. Do not engage with flagged passenger. That line hit her like cold water. She pulled out her crew tablet, fingers trembling, and typed a query into the secure dashboard. Who is Sierra Langston? The top result wasn't a passenger manifest. It was an old federal article titled, After the Crash, The Silence of Dr. Elora Langston, a name, a woman, a whistleblower, and a daughter. Becca stared at the screen. No. She whispered, not a celebrity, not someone powerful, just a girl, but the kind of girl the system never forgave for being underestimated in the front of the plane. Captain Reyes got up from his seat and walked to the rear cabin. Not for coffee. For context, he approached Becca outside the galley. Voice quiet. Measured. Tell me again what happened at boarding. Becca crossed her arms. She didn't look like she belonged in 2A. He blinked. Did you verify her ID? I looked at the pass. It was printed. Did you scan it? Silence. Becca's eyes narrowed. She looked confused. She was alone. And that was enough. He asked. His voice was still low, but it was sharper now. You called security on a teenager who had a legal seat. She didn't act like someone in first class. He stared at her. That's the problem, he said. Then he turned and walked away. Up in New York. Director Whitaker made the call. She didn't hesitate. All Virejet inbound flights to 5 regional hubs are to be suspended pending ethics score review, effective immediately. On social media, news hadn't broken yet, but reporters were already sniffing. One freelance journalist posted a vague tweet hearing unconfirmed chatter. Tier 4 Langston Ethics Protocol just activated on Flight 218. If that's real, brace yourselves. Minutes later, it had 18,000 retweets. In the air, Sierra felt her screen vibrate once. She glanced down. Langston Tier 4, flag acknowledged, FAA review in progress. Cabin event logs accepted. Action gate hold initiated across 5 airports. Her thumb hovered. No smile. Just a breath. This isn't about revenge, she reminded herself. It's about record, about recognition, about the ones who came before and were never believed. Across the aisle, the snoring man woke briefly, adjusted his headrest, and fell asleep again. He had no idea history had shifted 3 rows behind him. Somewhere on the ground, a systems manager stared at a red dashboard blinking the same word over and over, active. And above it all, Flight 218 flew steady. But the world beneath it had already changed. 12 minutes after takeoff, the intercom pinged with a chime that didn't sound like the usual announcement. It was too short, too clipped. It wasn't for passengers. The flight crew knew the difference. A moment later, a second chime followed this one familiar. Captain Julian Reyes' voice came on, steady as always. Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. We've been asked by air traffic control to maintain our current altitude for the time being. It's a routine delay related to gate confirmation. We appreciate your patience, and we'll update you as we receive more information. The pause after routine lasted half a beat too long. Sierra noticed, so did the woman in 1C, who slowly removed her headphones. So did the man across the aisle from Becca, who stopped scrolling and stared ahead. Something had shifted, not the flight, the atmosphere. In row 34, Sierra didn't move. She kept her hands folded neatly on her lap, legs crossed at the ankles. Her backpack rested under the seat, zipped shut, device inside. Quiet now, but everything else was loud. Not outside, inside. You did this. A voice in her head whispered, you started it, but did you finish anything or just escalate? She swallowed. There was no going back. 4 rows behind the cockpit. Becca Monroe sat in the jump seat near the galley, scrolling through her crew tablet. Her fingers trembled slightly. The interface refused to refresh. Every attempt to access crew incident logs was denied. A red banner flashed. Under ethics review, permissions revoked. She tried to breathe slowly, but her thoughts were spiraling. It wasn't just a mistake. It wasn't just an overreaction. The girl had triggered something, and Becca's name was now attached to it. Captain Reyes stood quietly in the cockpit, headset still pressed to one ear. His co-pilot, Grant, read the message aloud again. Flight 218 under Tier 4, FAA Ethics Observation. Langston Protocol active. Gate reservations suspended across Logan, O'Hare, Pearson, SeaTac, and BWI. Reyes didn't speak. He didn't need to. He had flown through thunderstorms, through mechanical failures, through protests and airport blackouts, but never through this. An ethics lock was rare. A Tier 4 lock. Almost unheard of, and the last name attached to it. Langston. His mind flashed back to a training session years ago. The protocol developed by a systems engineer, Elora Langston, after her mysterious death on Flight 908. Most of the team had forgotten it. Reyes hadn't. He reached for the manual. In first class. Murmurs had started to ripple. A businessman leaned toward the window and muttered, "It's not weather." Beside him, a young mother looked up from her tablet and said softly, "They haven't served drinks yet." "That's unusual." Another man asked the flight attendant, "How long are we circling?" The flight attendant forced a smile. "It's nothing serious, just traffic delays." But her eyes flicked to the front, then to the galley, then to the device she wasn't allowed to touch anymore. Passengers could sense it. This wasn't routine. In row 34, Sierra stared out the window. The sky was still endless. Soft, hazy blue. Clouds streaked beneath them like spilled milk. She thought of the code running beneath it all. Invisible. Powerful. Like her mother. She whispered the name under her breath. Elora. Not a cry. A grounding. She missed her. Not just in the way daughters miss mothers, but in the way systems miss vision. In the way silence misses someone who always asked the hard questions. What would she do? Would she have triggered it? Sierra didn't know. But she did know this. Her mother wouldn't have apologized for making people uncomfortable. Down the aisle. A flight attendant approached Becca and whispered, "Should we tell them something?" Becca shook her head. "Tell them what?" "That we might be grounded because I doubted the wrong girl." Her voice cracked at the end. It didn't sound defensive anymore. It sounded scared. For the first time in her career, Becca felt the structure cracking. The chain of command wasn't protecting her. The screen wasn't refreshing. The system wasn't silent. It was watching. And for the first time, she realized that maybe it always had been. In Washington, D.C., a live FAA dashboard updated again. Flight 218 observation level escalated. Director Danica Whitaker received an email. Subject line, RE passenger flag. Sierra Langston Center Office of Ethics Coordination. Legal Division recommend pre-clearance for closed session review. Passenger Langston's flag aligns with prior concerns regarding Virejet's historical underreporting of passenger reassignments by demographic. She stared at the line for a long time. Demographic. They weren't just talking about Sierra anymore. They were talking about the pattern. In the cabin, the silence grew heavy. No turbulence and no emergency. Just stillness, the kind that tells you something's wrong. The kind that asks you to choose, will you look away or lean in? A woman near the front, in a white blazer, turned toward the rear and asked her husband, "Do you think this is because of that girl?" He shrugged. "She's just a kid. She's the only one who got removed." He didn't answer. She looked again. She could just barely make out Sierra, back straight, shoulders still, eyes forward. She didn't look powerful. She looked patient. And somehow, that was more frightening. Captain Reyes returned to the cockpit. He checked the status again. 5 major airports, all blinking red. Each one tagged Langston Protocol engaged. Gate hold, ethics review required. He picked up the intercom and hesitated, then spoke. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain again. We've been informed that a temporary ethics observation is affecting several inbound flight gates. We are required to maintain holding pattern until clearance is restored. This is not an emergency, but it is a formal review. We appreciate your patience." There it was. Truth. Polished. Clipped. Real. The cabin shifted again, no longer passive, now alert. In row 34, Sierra exhaled, not because she wanted attention, but because for the first time in 20 minutes, someone said what it was, and the cabin held its breath. The cabin had gone silent, but Sierra Langston's mind wasn't, not even close. She sat in 34D, chin tilted slightly toward the window, though her eyes weren't looking at clouds anymore. They were locked inward on memory. It was the quiet that did it, the pause between events, the absence of motion. It reminded her of another flight, one she didn't remember boarding, only landing. She had been 7, her mother had been alive, and they had sat together near the rear of a nearly empty plane bound for Oakland. It was a red-eye, quiet, cold. Her mother had wrapped an oversized scarf around Sierra's shoulders, not just for warmth, but protection, from eyes, from whispers, from judgment. That was Elora Langston. Silent strength, the kind of woman who didn't correct you with her voice but with the data she submitted quietly at 2A. Sierra blinked back tears and looked around the plane now. The rows, the people. Everyone was seated, but not everyone was still. People shifted, cleared throats, whispered under breath. It wasn't chaos. It was controlled discomfort, the kind that happens when a system realizes it's being observed by something older than policy. In first class, one of the more vocal passengers, a man in his late 50s named Clay Hargrove, pressed his call button. The light blinked for almost a full minute before someone responded. When a different flight attendant arrived, not Becca, he leaned in and whispered sharply, "What exactly is going on with this flight I paid to be early?" Not to be part of some social experiment, the flight attendant remained calm. "I understand, sir. We're in a holding pattern due to an active ethics protocol being reviewed by FAA oversight." Hargrove scoffed. "What ethics? I saw what happened. That girl wasn't supposed to be in 2A. Why is this about her?" There was a pause. Then the attendant said softly, "Maybe you're asking the wrong question." Meanwhile, in the flight crew galley, Becca Monroe was unraveling, not outwardly, but internally. She was trapped in a replay loop. She could still hear her own voice from earlier. "You don't belong up here, sweetheart." And then the girl's face, not angry, not scared, just still. That silence had unnerved her more than any scream. Because in that silence, Becca saw something she hadn't expected to see. Power, not in the dramatic, shouting kind of way, but in the unblinking, "I don't need your permission" kind of way. Becca scrolled back through her own crew logs. It was all there. The unverified boarding pass, the call to security within seconds, no ID double check, no supervisor consult. She'd acted fast, too fast. She hadn't asked, hadn't paused, hadn't even looked the girl in the eye for more than 3 seconds. And now her name was on the record, her role in this moment. Permanent Becca Monroe, Line 2 of the flag. Up in Washington, D.C. Director Danica Whitaker received another encrypted ping. It wasn't from FAA internal, it was from a partner agency, Passenger Advocacy Infrastructure Board, internal note subject Langston, tied to posthumous estate of Elora Langston. Confirmed sole heir to compliance patents and retired protocol rights. Danica exhaled slowly. This wasn't just about a passenger. This was about a legacy holder. One whose name had gone dormant in systems, but not in memory. Elora Langston had been one of the quiet reformers, not famous, not loud, but the creator of ethics score mapping and passive surveillance accountability, measures long buried, long fought against. Her work had been too precise, too uncomfortable. She'd died before the public ever learned what she tried to fix, but her daughter had just reactivated the architecture, and the system had remembered the bloodline. Back on the plane. Captain Reyes stood alone in the cockpit. The windows stretched into blue and light, the clouds thin, like torn silk. He thought of his own daughter, 13, brown-skinned like him, quiet, brilliant. He'd flown hundreds of routes, but this one had brought him back to something more personal. He remembered what it felt like to see her come home from school, tight-lipped after a teacher said something just vague enough to escape punishment. "Are you sure it wasn't just a misunderstanding?" he'd asked her once. She'd only said, "Daddy, I know when someone doesn't want me there, and now, on this flight." He saw it again, in the girl in 34D, sitting perfectly still, like she'd trained for this. In the rear of the plane, a woman in her 60s turned to Sierra quietly. "I don't mean to bother you," she said softly, "but I saw what happened." Sierra turned slowly. "Didn't speak. I just wanted to say, I'm sorry. That was wrong." The woman's voice cracked. "I've lived through a lot, but watching that happen so fast and seeing you just sit there, I saw your strength. Your mother would be proud." Sierra finally nodded. "Thank you," she whispered. It wasn't validation she wanted. It was witnessing. And in that moment, she had it. Down below, airports were reacting. Logan, O'Hare, SeaTac, Pearson, BWI, each had issued ethics delay notices for all inbound Virejet flights tied to regional hubs. The message was clear until the protocol review was complete. Nothing moved. Because when a Langston protocol was triggered, the air didn't just carry passengers, it carried history, and history had a name again, back in the air. Sierra pulled the small chain around her neck. At the end of it was a simple silver key, not decorative, functional. It belonged to a safe deposit box in Sacramento. Her mother's. She hadn't opened it yet. She didn't need to. Not until now, because the world her mother tried to warn them about was finally listening. The moment the Langston Protocol reached Tier 5, the effect wasn't just procedural, it was personal and public. Airports didn't just delay flights, they broadcasted the reason. Not loudly, not to passengers, but to administrators, airline partners, international compliance boards. It showed up as one word in internal systems ethics hold, and next to it, activated by S. Langston R. Witness flagged. That combination of a legacy surname and a real-time incident was like a detonation in the risk management networks of Virejet's upper echelons. In Virejet's Chicago HQ, Ethan Crowley, VP of Passenger Affairs, hadn't even finished his protein shake when 3 executives burst into his office. "Tell me this isn't Elora Langston's daughter," the head of risk said, slamming a tablet on his desk. The screen showed a blurry security clip, Sierra being escorted back to row 34, calm as ever. Below it, a digital profile matched Sierra L. Langston, 17, confirmed heir to E.L. Systems estate. "Why didn't we know she was on board?" someone asked. Ethan stared blankly. I thought that protocol was retired." The room fell dead silent. Then the risk director said darkly, "You don't retire legacy code that has the power to freeze 5 international airports in 6 minutes. You bury it." And apparently, she just resurrected it. Meanwhile, at Logan Airport runway, 4L had a flashing tag, Priority Ethics Lock. Gate 16 unavailable. The ground crew supervisor scratched his head. What the hell does passenger ethics block, Tier 5 Langston, mean? No one answered. Because no one had ever seen it used. Until now, back in the air, the Virejet 218 cabin had grown dense, still quiet, but thick with awareness. The kind of awareness that comes when authority wavers, and passengers, ordinary people, start asking questions. In first class, Clay Hargrove stood, "I want answers." he said, loud enough for others to hear, across the aisle. A younger passenger, a tech developer named Amaya Nunes, stood too. Yeah, she said calmly, but maybe we're asking the wrong people. She looked straight at Becca, standing in the galley, pale and tight-lipped. What's your name? Amaya asked. Becca didn't answer. She's the one who removed the girl, another voice muttered from 3A. The woman in 2B, who'd been quiet since the beginning, finally spoke up. Maybe someone should ask why she thought the girl didn't belong. That was it. The question, hanging like smoke. In row 34, Sierra felt the shift, not from voices, but from energy. People were no longer looking through her. They were looking at her. Some with curiosity, some with apology, some with that old uncomfortable silence that says, you were right, we just didn't know how to say it. Back in the cockpit, Captain Reyes received clearance to descend, sort of, Logan Tower Control. You are authorized to land, but Gate 16 remains locked for federal debrief. Alternate route under FAA instruction. He exhaled and pressed the intercom. Ladies and gentlemen, we've received descent authorization. However, upon landing, we'll remain on board while FAA ethics personnel conduct a preliminary cabin interview. This is not a criminal matter, but it is a mandated compliance review. Please remain calm and seated after we arrive. There it was. Official. The first-class passengers exchanged worried glances. The mid-cabin passengers froze. Row 34. Sierra just nodded slightly, as if she'd expected this all along. Meanwhile, inside FAA HQ Washington, D.C., Director Danica Whitaker's phone rang. It was Senator Eloise Hart, chair of the Transportation Ethics Board. Danica, is this true? Langston's daughter triggered a Tier 5 on a live flight Danica didn't sugarcoat? Yes. And she did it flawlessly. Didn't demand, didn't raise her voice. Just activated a passive witness system tied to her late mother's code. Senator Hart paused, then asked the question that shifted the tone of the entire conversation. What does that mean for the airline? Danica leaned forward, eyes steady. It means they just silenced the wrong girl at 38,000 feet while carrying her mother's ethical backbone in the cloud. In Virejet Legal, panic escalated. A 19-page memo hit the inboxes of their general counsel, outlining all prior incidents where non-white passengers had been downgraded for security confusion. Sierra's incident fit the pattern, too neatly. But this time, the difference was stark. A digital witness protocol embedded by Elora Langston herself, a confirmed bloodline with full patent rights, real-time FAA oversight, a rising wave of passenger unrest, and most dangerous of all, public sympathy. The kind of sympathy that trends, the kind that costs. Back in the air, the cabin crew moved like shadows, silent, corrective, polite, but no longer in control. In seat 1A, which had once been forcibly emptied, no one dared sit. It remained open, a quiet memorial. In row 34, the elderly woman next to Sierra whispered, "Are you scared?" Sierra looked down at her hands, steady, folded, then whispered, "No, I'm tired." Pause. Tired of pretending silence is enough. The woman didn't speak again. She just reached for Sierra's hand, not to comfort, to acknowledge, and together. They waited, not for the landing, but for what would follow. Because when you carry legacy, you don't fly alone. The wheels hit the tarmac with a muted thud. Not a cheer, not a round of applause. Just silence, the kind that only descends when truth is near. Virejet Flight 218 had landed at Logan International, but no one stood, no one reached for bags, no one clapped, because they all knew the real arrival hadn't happened yet. From the window in 34D, Sierra Langston could see 3 black government vehicles parked just beyond the jet bridge. Unmarked, still waiting. She had never been in trouble, not like this, but she wasn't afraid. She wasn't even angry. What she felt was stranger readiness. like she had been walking toward this moment her entire life, or maybe her mother had, and she had just kept walking, in first class. Passengers began to murmur. Quietly, a man in 2C whispered, "I didn't sign up to be part of some federal circus." A woman behind him snapped, "Then maybe don't fly on a system built by people you ignore." No one answered. Inside Logan's Federal Aviation interview room, Danica Whitaker walked in with a folder. No entourage, no press, just her presence. At the table sat Captain Julian Reyes, Flight Attendant Becca Monroe, and a company lawyer from Virejet Corporate looking like he'd rather be anywhere else. Danica placed the folder on the table. "We'll be conducting passenger witness debriefs shortly. But before that, I need full crew accounts." Without spin, Becca opened her mouth, then stopped. Her voice cracked. I made a call based on standard procedure. The seat wasn't verified in the manifest. The barcode came up invalid. Danica cut her off gently. "Did you ask her name?" Silence. "Did you double-check her ID? Did you contact ground control to verify an override?" Becca closed her eyes. "No." Captain Reyes leaned forward. "I want to be clear. The moment I realized we had a compliance conflict, I took no disciplinary action. I followed FAA directives. I gave Ms. Langston full acknowledgement." Danica nodded. "Thank you, Captain." Then she turned to the lawyer. "Do you know how many ethics flags Virejet has accrued in the last 2 years?" He swallowed. Didn't answer. Danica slid a page across the table. 17. All involving passengers of color. 4 were minors, 2 involved downgrade conflicts, and 1, she paused, involved a mother with the last name Langston. Back on the plane, Sierra sat across from Agent Corwin, a calm-eyed FAA representative. His voice was gentle, his pace slow. "You activated the Tier 5 failsafe. Can you walk me through what you felt in that moment?" Sierra didn't blink. "It wasn't what I felt. It was what I saw." He waited. She continued. "I saw someone decide who I was, based on nothing, and I saw everyone let her do it, and I realized my mother built a system for that exact moment." Corwin nodded. "And what did you expect would happen?" Sierra looked him in the eye. "Nothing. I expected them to take me off the plane. I expected to disappear quietly like most of us do." Pause. "But I thought, if her name still meant anything, it might slow the plane down, just long enough for someone to notice." Corwin's hand hovered over his notes, and now Sierra's voice steadied. "Now I think the plane is slowing down for more than just me." Meanwhile, outside on the tarmac, news hadn't broken, yet, but whispers were beginning. Employees texting cousins at other airlines. Security teams muttering about some VIP girl causing a freeze. FAA techs updating server permissions and reviewing old files marked Langston Protocol. Do not modify. What had once been buried was now waking up, and waking systems are louder than headlines. In the Virejet emergency boardroom back in Chicago, a call had just ended with 2 words no CEO wants to hear. Congressional inquiry. It wasn't about just this incident, it was about pattern, power, and a 17-year-old girl with a last name strong enough to stop airplanes. Back in Logan's interview room, Becca was crying softly, not performative, not defensive, just exposed. "I didn't mean to do it that way. I didn't mean to become that person." Danica leaned forward. "None of us ever do." "That's why the system matters more than the story we tell ourselves." Becca covered her face. She didn't even flinch. She didn't yell. She just activated. Danica nodded, because she knew what to do. That's what real legacy is. Not inheritance, instruction. As the FAA team left the plane and the sun began to rise above the Boston skyline, passengers started exiting slowly. Some nodded at Sierra as they passed. Some whispered apologies. Some said nothing but paused beside her row longer than necessary. Not pity, not guilt, recognition. The kind you offer someone who has lived something you never had the strength to name. The media didn't catch wind of it right away, but algorithms did. Within hours, internal compliance servers flagged 5 airport code locks under the same name, Langston. By the next morning, that name had crossed from aviation systems to social feeds. And once it reached the hands of one freelance journalist, a sharp-eyed researcher named Lennox Gray, the story began to breathe. It started with a headline, "Teen Passenger Triggers Aviation Freeze FAA Confirms Legacy Protocol Linked to Elora Langston." A single tweet, no photo, no location, just that name, Langston. And within 5 hours, it had over 1.2 million impressions, because people remembered Elora Langston wasn't just some bureaucrat. She was the ethics architect who, a decade ago, tried to build digital conscience into systems that had none. The woman who had testified before Congress, who built Passenger Bill of Dignity 1.0, who died under mysterious circumstances before the Senate passed her final amendment. And now, suddenly, her daughter was back, and she'd activated her mother's ghost. In her hotel room near Logan, Sierra sat on the edge of the bed, still in the same clothes, shoes off. She scrolled through posts, barely blinking. Most didn't know her name yet, some only guessed, but the ones who got it right weren't mocking. They were writing things like, "If Elora's daughter is flying commercial, something in this system is broken." Or, "She didn't shout, she activated, and that's power I want my daughters to know." Her phone buzzed again. A message from an unknown number. "You're not alone. I trained under your mom. I owe her my career. If you need anything, I'm here. Initials only. A.D." In the corporate suite at Firejet, panic had turned strategic. The legal team had drafted a 4-paragraph statement of regret that somehow mentioned neither race, nor name, nor fault. But the PR head tore it in half. "This won't hold. This girl has a digital footprint. She's not anonymous. She's ancestral. We need accountability, not blanket language." They were too late, because across media platforms, new interviews were already happening, not with Sierra, but with former interns, flight staff, even tech developers who'd once worked with Elora Langston, and every single one of them said the same thing. "She told us this would happen. She said, one day, someone like my daughter will be forced to choose between silence and system, and she'll need something more than courage. She'll need code." That night, a primetime anchor led with "Who is Sierra Langston?" and behind her, a side-by-side image, appeared Elora in Senate testimony, a blurry, grainy still of Sierra from Logan's tarmac, standing calmly as officials surrounded her. The resemblance was striking, not just in face, but in posture, the same quiet fire. Meanwhile, Sierra sat in the dark, her grandmother's ring in one hand, a piece of notebook paper in the other. It was a note Elora had written on the back of a boarding pass, folded 4 times, faded ink. She'd kept it since she was 9. When they ask you who you are, don't tell them your title. Tell them your line, where you come from, what you stand for, and what you're willing to delay a plane to protect. She could feel it now, that line running through her. Her mother. And every passenger who'd ever been humiliated in quiet. The next morning, a knock came. Not loud, just a tap. She opened the door to find Danica Whitaker waiting. Same calm eyes, same folder. But this time, no questions. Only a statement. You don't have to speak to the press. You don't owe them your story. But we're reinstating your mother's passenger ethics protocol, fully nationally, and your activation is the reason why. Sierra blinked slowly. What happens now? Danica smiled, gently. That depends on what you want. We've never had someone like you trigger Tier 5 before, and no one has ever triggered it correctly. Sierra sat down, her hands still. I don't want revenge. Danica nodded. Good, because we're offering you something else, a seat at the redesign table. Meanwhile, across the country, 5 more former Virejet passengers came forward, all women, all people of color, all with quiet, similar stories, and one, a pediatrician from Oakland, said this on camera: "I was tired of being silent. But when I read what Sierra did, I remembered I wasn't just a passenger. I was a witness, and my memory is stronger than their system." By the time Sierra Langston set foot outside her hotel in Boston, she had become a symbol, not a viral moment, not a trending hashtag, but something far quieter, a reckoning. It was raining, soft and steady. She pulled the hood of her sweatshirt over her head, clutching a warm tea in her hands, trying to breathe. She had done nothing but sit in her assigned seat, and somehow that act had disrupted an entire national system. Inside the U.S. Senate Subcommittee on Transportation, the chairperson cleared his throat. "We are not here to question the legitimacy of the passenger ethics protocol. We are here to ask why it was buried and why it took a teenager to resurrect it." On the screen behind him, her name was written in white: Sierra Langston, passenger, 34D, Tier 5, Trigger Virejet 218, in a closed room nearby. Sierra sat with Danica Whitaker and 2 staffers from the FAA's Public Reform Unit. A woman from legal was explaining options for protection, media handling, and civil action. Sierra, however, wasn't listening to logistics. She was thinking of her mother, of the letter she found sealed inside Elora's old passport. Only weeks before her death, it read, "The seat you sit in will not define you, but what you do when they try to take it will." On the screen, as networks aired the subcommittee hearing, the public watched an ethics audit begin live. Lawmakers called out Virejet's deletion of internal compliance reports, suppressed testimonies from whistleblowers, the quiet shutdown of Elora Langston's final systems test, and then they played the audio from Flight 218. Not the slap of a bag, not the crew's commands, just Sierra's calm voice. "Please check the override log. My mother built this failsafe. Her name is Elora Langston. It rang through every committee chamber like a bell." At the airport. Meanwhile, Becca Monroe, the flight attendant who had sparked the incident, had voluntarily resigned, but not before requesting a private meeting with Sierra. That meeting took place in a quiet FAA building lobby. Becca sat on one side, Sierra on the other. There were no cameras, no press, no statements. Becca's hands trembled as she said, "I didn't know. I wasn't thinking about legacy or systems or bias. I was thinking about control, about making the flight run smooth. And I saw you, and I assumed you didn't belong." Sierra nodded slowly. Most of us don't get the luxury of making assumptions that don't cost someone else something. Becca's eyes filled. "I've read everything about your mom now. I watched her hearings. I cried through the part where she said, 'We don't build systems for the best of us. We build them for the moments when we are at our worst.' I was at my worst." There was a long pause. Then Sierra said something no one expected. "I'm not here to ruin you, Becca. But if you walk away from this unchanged, then all you did was resign. You didn't reform." At the same time, across America, other passengers began sharing stories: quiet humiliations in coach, arbitrary upgrades denied, delays weaponized against the most vulnerable, and then someone posted, "What if every time something like that happened, we logged it? What if Sierra didn't just remind us to speak up, but showed us how?" Within days, a civilian-run platform was launched, SeatTruth.org, documenting airline treatment trends by race, gender, and class. It crashed in its first hour. Too many submissions, but it had already done its job. It told the world, "You're not imagining it." Back at the hearing, the FAA's lead systems architect made a bold statement. "We are reinstating all dormant protocols linked to Elora Langston's architecture. And we are creating an independent ethics verification board on which Ms. Sierra Langston will have an honorary advisory seat. The room murmured. Some called it excessive, performative, even political, but others just nodded, because for the first time in years, it felt like aviation was grounded in something more than turbulence and ticket prices. Later that night, Sierra sat alone with a laptop. The FAA had given her access to her mother's original systems log, every code change, every protocol adjustment. She scrolled through Elora's notes, found one marked for Sierra. It wasn't technical. Just a paragraph. I wrote these lines for the day someone would forget that being seated isn't a privilege. It's a right. You don't owe anyone your explanation, but if the moment ever comes when they try to erase you, baby, light the system up. She closed the laptop, tears silent, then looked up and whispered, "It's lit. Mama." There was a moment just after the hearings ended, and the public furor cooled when Sierra Langston could have disappeared. She thought about it, too. A quiet life, a return to anonymity, finishing school in the background, letting the system fix itself. But something inside her refused. Not pride, not anger, legacy. She walked into the press briefing that day in jeans and a gray sweater. No entourage, no makeup team. No legal handler whispering over her shoulder, just Sierra, daughter of Elora Langston, passenger 34D, witness, trigger, now, something else. A journalist asked first, "What title do you prefer now, advocate, consultant, reformer?" Sierra paused, then smiled softly. Just Sierra. You don't need a title to call truth by its name. The room went quiet. Some cameras zoomed in, others just held focus. And she began to speak, not as a spokesperson, but as a daughter who had once flown with her mother and coach. Back when the world was quieter, but still just as cruel. She told them about watching Elora offer her seat to elders, even when exhausted, how her mother carried documentation instead of outrage, how silence could be a strategy, but never a sentence. My mom used to say, "Don't fight fire with fire, fight it with framework." That's what Tier 5 was. It was a framework for when all the other tools fail. Over the following weeks, Sierra received over 46 formal invitations, a speaking slot at the World Aviation Integrity Conference, a role at the National Passenger Rights Consortium advisory status on a proposed civil systems reform bill, and even a part-time visiting fellowship at Elora's alma mater. She turned down most of them. What she accepted, though, changed everything. A project called Wingspan, originally a dormant software module buried inside her mother's protocols. Wingspan was designed to monitor, not punish, but pattern. It tracked treatment trends, from check-in language to boarding behavior, from upgrade patterns to in-flight reprimands. It didn't collect names. It didn't assign blame. It just asked one question. Does this happen to everyone? Sierra didn't just help revive it. She renamed it Wingspan, the Langston layer, and partnered with a non-profit coding collective of underrepresented youth to build it out. Suddenly, the girl in seat 34D was creating a digital conscience for the skies. Meanwhile, back at Virejet, silence was loud. Their CEO had stepped down. The ethics team resigned. The board released a video apology, but never mentioned Sierra by name. She didn't need them to, because SeatTruth.org was now fielding over 3,000 submissions per week, because school children were doing projects on Elora Langston, because Wingspan was being quietly adopted by 3 major international carriers, not because it was required, but because it worked. Yet, for all the headlines, Sierra stayed grounded. She still went grocery shopping in sweats, still took the bus to her coding meetups, still watched reruns of her mom's favorite sci-fi show late at night, replaying the one scene where the captain says, "It's not about being the loudest voice in the sky. It's about being the one who doesn't fall when the silence is heavy." She kept a low profile until one day, A letter arrived from Charlotte Bennett, daughter of Virejet's former CEO. It read, "You don't know me, but I know who you are. My father made decisions that hurt people. He's trying to atone, but I know that's not yours to carry. What I wanted to say is this: you didn't ruin anyone. You revealed everyone. Thank you." Sierra folded the letter and placed it in the same envelope where she kept her mother's notes. Under the phrase personal archive, she wrote in pen reclamation is not revenge, and then came the part she hadn't expected: a plane, a familiar seat, and a whisper. She was flying to Seattle for a tech ethics panel, seated in row 2 this time not because of privilege, but because the airline had adopted Langston Protocol priority. All passengers under review for mistreatment received Dignity First upgrades. And, as she settled into her seat, a man across the aisle leaned over. Gray beard, brown leather journal, gentle voice. "Excuse me, are you Sierra?" She nodded. "I thought so. I was on Flight 218. I was in 23C. I didn't speak up that day. I didn't know who you were, but I saw what happened. And when you said, 'Check the override log,' something in me cracked. I used to work in systems, too. I knew what that meant, and I was ashamed I said nothing." She turned to him. "You don't owe me anything." He nodded, eyes wet. "I know, but I owed myself this moment." The plane lifted off. Sierra looked out the window. Clouds thinned, light softened, and for the first time in weeks, she exhaled, not because it was over, but because she knew it had only just begun. The library had been closed for 3 years, a squat, concrete building on the south edge of Garrison County. Cracked windows, a faded mural of an open book. Most people passed it on the way to the airport without a second glance. But Sierra Langston didn't pass it. She stopped, and she bought it. No one understood at first. Why a girl who could have accepted $1 million speaking circuit, a TV deal, even political grooming chose a forgotten library? She had 100 better offers, but Sierra wanted this. A space not to broadcast her voice, but to return power to others who had never been listened to. The day the doors reopened, the crowd wasn't large, maybe 20 people. But in the back row sat Leah Harmon, a shy, brilliant 11-year-old who had been silently documenting racial disparities in public transportation with her older brother. She held a small notebook and whispered to her sibling, "That's her." Sierra didn't give a speech. She just placed a single plaque by the entrance. It read, "Flight 218 was the spark. This is the archive. May no one ever be silenced twice." Over the next weeks, the newly named Langston Center for Ethical Systems became something more than a library. It became a nerve center, a code lab for students designing anti-bias AI systems, a training ground for future passenger rights officers, a record-keeping haven for mistreated travelers who never went viral, but whose experiences mattered just as much. And Sierra, she didn't sit in the corner office. She sat on the floor with students, reviewed code, listened, held space. Across the country, institutions were shifting. Airline training materials added the Langston Clause, a requirement for situational de-escalation that prioritized dignity before directive. Transportation universities introduced passenger ethics modules. Tech conferences held panels titled Legacy as Framework, the Sierra Effect. And yet, Sierra never raised her voice. She never posted grand monologues, never made reaction videos. She just kept building. One afternoon, a boy walked into the center with his grandmother. He was 9, small, curious, holding a faded model airplane. The woman told Sierra quietly, "He's been scared of flying since he saw a man dragged off a plane 3 years ago. He asks if it could happen to him." Sierra knelt. "Can I tell you something?" "Yeah." He nodded. She held up a small badge, a mock prototype the lab students were designing. It read, Wingspan Junior, Tier of Trust. This means your voice matters in the air. That someone built systems thinking about kids like you. You're not invisible. The boy looked at the badge like it was gold. His grandmother wept. The story of Sierra Langston was no longer about what happened on Flight 218. It was now about what came after. The building, the healing, the quiet scaffolding of a better future. One story at a time. At a National Educators Summit, a professor stood up and said, "In a world full of disruption." Sierra didn't shout louder. She made the silence safer. At a memorial service in her hometown, an elderly man approached Sierra. He wore a navy blue cap stitched with "Pilot Retired." He spoke softly. "I flew for 32 years. I've seen the worst of what we called procedure. I want to thank you not for exposing it, but for refusing to become it. But still." Sierra carried her doubts. She lay awake some nights wondering, did I do enough? What if the system just resets under new names? What if they forget again? She once whispered this to her friend Aisha, the systems coder who had helped reformat Wingspan. Aisha replied, "They might, but you gave the next ones a framework. You didn't build a moment, you built memory. And perhaps that was it all along. Not a headline, not even a law, but a memory that systems could and should remember those they were made to serve." On the first anniversary of Flight 218, Sierra returned to seat 34D. The airline had invited her for a ceremonial flight. She had declined the press coverage, but agreed to board quietly. The seat was waiting, a fresh white orchid tucked into the safety card slot, a note pinned to the headrest to the girl who taught us where justice truly sits. "Welcome back." She sat, closed her eyes, breathed in, and whispered to the air, "This time, we all fly right." The plane hummed under her. Seat 34D had always been the same aisle seat, mid-cabin, close enough to hear the hum of the galley, but far enough not to be disturbed. Only this time, it wasn't the same. The lighting was softer, the air quieter. Flight attendants moved differently, calmer, attentive, alert, but not performative. It was subtle. But Sierra Langston noticed everything. She watched a white-haired woman ask for assistance boarding, and a young man in a crisp uniform immediately knelt to her level, not to rush her, but to listen. Two kids fought over a window seat. A flight attendant diffused it by offering both of them pilot pins and inviting them to the cockpit after takeoff. No eye rolls, no sighs, no escalation, only presence. This wasn't performative change. It was cultural shift, and it had her mother's fingerprints all over it. Sierra sat back in her seat, the same one where it had all begun, and reached into her bag. From inside, she drew a small navy blue notebook. The spine was worn, pages filled with her mother's sketches, notes, and reflections. But one page, tucked in the back, remained untouched for years. Elora Langston had written just one sentence on it. "They may not see you now, but build like they always will." Sierra smiled faintly, because they did see her now. But it wasn't about her. It was about everyone who'd ever been told, "You don't belong here." Everyone who had been moved, silenced, overlooked, or punished for simply being present. Now, those seats were protected, not by vengeance, but by architecture, by codes, clauses, and charters that had names and functions, and quietly by memory. As the plane climbed, Sierra turned toward the window. Clouds parted. The morning light scattered across the wing. She thought of her mother again, not just the system she left behind, but the softness, the kindness, the choice to heal without spectacle. And suddenly, Sierra whispered not to anyone in particular, but as a declaration to the sky, "You did it, Mom." At the front of the cabin, the pilot's voice came through. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Flores. On behalf of Air Equity Airlines and every partner of the Langston Protocol Network, I want to welcome you aboard. We are proud to be a Tier 5 certified, Dignity First certified airline, and we want to thank one of our passengers today for helping reshape how justice is seated. Sierra froze. People looked around. Then the co-pilot continued. She doesn't need an introduction. She already gave us a future. Row by row, the cabin began to applaud. Soft at first, then steady, then standing. People rose. All of them. Some with tears, some with gratitude, some just to witness what healing looked like when it walked back into the same seat where it was once diminished. Sierra didn't stand. She just sat there, hands clasped in her lap, eyes wide but calm, letting it wash over her. And when the applause quieted, a young flight attendant approached her with a folded napkin. It read, "Seat 34D, original site of restoration. Permanent marker. At baggage claim hours later." No press waited, no reporters, no fanfare, just Sierra and her carry-on. And when she stepped into the terminal, she noticed a wall-mounted screen with digital portraits scrolling quietly. A banner above it read, "Silent Architects of Flight Reform." There, next to Dr. Elora Langston, was a new image. Sierra Langston, smiling softly. Captioned simply, she didn't raise her voice. She raised the standard. As she exited the airport, her phone buzzed. A message from Leah Harmon, the 11-year-old girl from the Langston Center Lab. "Ms. Langston, we just finished version 3 of Wingspan. We added a mode for people with disabilities, language flags, and a peer record button for allies to use on someone else's behalf. We named the update Reclaim Mode. Hope we made you proud." Sierra typed back, "You didn't make me proud. You made us possible." She stepped into the sunlight. It was a quiet day. No more trials, no more debates, just legacy, breathing, living, expanding. And as Sierra walked toward the pickup zone, a little girl tugged on her mother's sleeve nearby. "Mom, that's the lady from the flight." The mother looked at Sierra and nodded. "That's her. She made the sky fair. She didn't yell. She didn't sue. She didn't make a scene. She simply sat back in the same seat where she was once removed and watched the world stand up." Sierra Langston's story isn't just about a flight gone wrong. It's about what comes after accountability, about how legacy is built not in moments of anger, but in the quiet commitment to rebuild what others broke. Her mother left behind a blueprint. Sierra turned it into a future, and now young girls like Leah, systems like Wingspan, protocols like Tier 5. They all exist because one woman refused to believe dignity needed a microphone to matter. Let this be a reminder, justice doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers through policy, training, and the choices we make every day. If you've ever been silenced, unseen, or displaced, this story was for you. Help us share it. Like this video. Share it with someone who still believes quiet people are powerless. Subscribe for more stories where justice sits exactly where it belongs next to you. We'll see you on the next flight.